Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ancient Aliens in Modern Times. We are your hosts, Stephanie Yelovich and
Melanie Wild. Let's get into it.
Ooh, I like how you sang that.
Thank you. I've been working on my singing ever since
nice.
I sent you that voice note, and you're like, you're actually not tone deaf. I was like, oh, really?
No,
Maybe
you're
I'll
not.
try harder.
Yeah, girl. I think a lot of people with tone deafness, they think like if they're not perfect singers that they're just tone deaf, right? They label themselves, and I'm like, it's amazing how we've messed with people's brains and people don't want to sing or use their voices because they think they have to sound like Taylor Swift, who is already fake and produced anyways. So I digress, but use your voice, everyone. Sing like no one's listening.
Joni loves it. She loves listening to me sing. There's
I love it.
there's some songs that I can get. There's some certain keys, and
Yeah,
then there's some
girl.
others that it's just best that I let someone else do that.
For sure. Not every song is for everybody to sing, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
So,
moving on.
what are we diving into today?
Well, we are diving into, I think, my most favorite pantheon and civilization. We are going to be exploring the Egyptian pantheon today, specifically looking at some ancient texts, one being the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which sounds very morbid, but it's not actually. It's very beautiful when you read the text. And then I know, Mel, you have some really cool stuff to share about Thoth and the Emerald Tablets. Do you
Yeah,
not?
I have some more fringe, what we would call fringe,
Mm-hmm.
uh, some stuff. I'm gonna bring up the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, which Thoth is technically from the Egyptian pantheon, but this goes back and alleges that he was the king of Atlantis before he arrived in ancient Khem or modern day Egypt. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going to get into that. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about his role in more of the Egyptian pantheon and what that was before I get into what he may or may not have been like in Atlantis. So
Awesome.
I'm excited to hear about the Egyptian Book of the Dead because I think it's going to have a lot of correspondence with the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, because there's a lot of conversation and discussion about the afterlife.
Yeah, very much so. And I think too, if for those of our listeners that have been following along since the beginning, we did do an episode on the creation story, the Egyptian creation story, as well as in another episode, the Atlantean creation story. And you'll find that Thoth is mentioned in the Atlantean creation story as the Amelaus. So he was very highly connected in Atlantis. He's referred to as an Atlantean king in the tablets, as you've mentioned. So for those that are interested in looking at that aspect of Egypt, like the creation story, you can visit our 5th episode, which is called Before the Flood, the forbidden story of our creation. So I'm not going to rehash that because we've already done it and we have a lot of really cool stuff to share today. So I'm going to get right into it. And I think in talking about the Book of the Dead, I'm going to give you a little history as to where it came from and why it's called that. And then we're going to look at the actual I might read a section, a very small section, but I'm going to talk more about the themes and the concepts that were found in the majority of just the entirety of Egyptian spirituality, because their idea of looking at death or the dead, it's not that they were obsessed with death, but they were concerned with transformation. This is really
Mm.
more what is happening in the Book of the Dead. And I kind of have a theory that is random that came up in my mind when I was looking at this. So you can totally please write in and let us know what your thoughts are on that. But I'll get there. So um, in our one episode where we were talking about or the creation story, we were talking about Zep Tepi. So this term means the first time or the time before. And I have always believed, and a lot of Egyptian teachers also who are, studying the hieroglyphs, the language, they're looking at the temples. They also believe that this refers to Atlantean times. So Mel and I were talking about, oh, is there a flood story in the Egyptian pantheon? But in reality, the flood story has really already happened because Zep Tepi was the time before. And many of us believe that Egypt was the rebuild of Atlantis. So, we know we messed up before and the knowledge was preserved and it was brought to this space or to this place, which is a very energetically active place, to basically rebuild a civilization. And Thoth was very instrumental in making that happen. So, what the other cool thing and that we've already talked about is that the Neteru, which are technically the Egyptian gods and goddesses, this is where the word nature is derived from because they were concepts and they were all, again, looking at the other pagan teachings, they were all derived from nature. So it's not that they were whispering to and worshiping trees, even though did some of us still do that. I talk to trees. But it's that they were looking at how nature lived, how nature unfolded, and what we can learn from that and those concepts in our daily lives because we are of nature. We come from nature. So we also have to look at modern day Egypt and we need to look at the gatekeeping, right? That's kind of gone down and has been happening. So it has been spoken that current Egypt is kind of run by the Voldenoks, for those who don't know, the Anunnaki, the Draconians, the Reptilians. So it is hijacked in the sense that there is so much knowledge that is being found and coming forward by scientists, archaeologists, spiritualists, and it's being gatekept by, honestly, Dr. Zahi Hawass. This is like he's the director of antiquities in Egypt, and it's kind of hard to listen to him because he just refuses that anything that is discovered outside of him or the Egyptian people to be nonsense. And there's a very narcissistic energy that comes forward. And I always used to hypothesize that this man was like a reincarnated priest and he was trying to keep us from the information, but maybe he's just controlled opposition and he's working with those bullies. So just know that like many of us have had past lives in Egypt. We've lived there. We've connected with this land for a reason. I don't think you're making it up. I certainly am not making it up. I visited Egypt. I experienced this myself. Poor Mel has listened to stories of me bawling about how I had to bow in the tomb of King Tutankhamun and how I I literally couldn't walk in until I bowed, and many things like that you can't quite explain. And I think there's nothing wrong with those things. I think that's why you're drawn to this civilization because so many of us, after Atlantis fell, were there and we were doing our
Mhm.
best to maintain this knowledge and these ways of healing. And there is a Stargate. There is totally a Stargate or multiple Stargates within Egypt. Um, so I digress, but I just wanted to note that because there's a lot of there's a lot of gatekeeping. So I'm going to continue by looking at the ancient texts, which I don't think are too kept from us, but it's how they're interpreted and how many scholars have interpreted them beforehand. So I think we need to look at kind of where these came from. So the Egyptian Book of the Dead is a compilation of multiple coffin texts, so texts that were inscribed into coffins, spells, and papyri or papyrus that have been combined together to create this book. And because they carry similar themes and they speak of the Neteru and the Last Judgment and the other world, which is a term that we have heard before in recent pantheons, excuse me, that we have been researching. So the actual Book of the Dead originated in the 19th century because multiple villagers that were digging in the cemeteries on the west bank of the Nile, so this was near Luxor, in southern Egypt, they would refer in Arabic to the papyrus sheets and scrolls they found regularly in tombs as dead people's books. So there was this German Egyptologist by the name of Karl Richard Lepsius, and he first referred to this as Totenbuch, which in German means the Book of the Dead. So in 1842, and from then on, Egyptologists and scholars have used this name to describe all of these texts. There's one called In the Coming Forth by Day, as the Egyptians call this document. And what we need to understand is there's not really an overarching narrative. So a lot of this is it's been put into chapters by scholars. So I don't mind that, but know that that was not originally how they were found. So some of the spells, so just looking at the timeline of this, some of these spells predate the formation of the Egyptian state around 3100 BC. And the myths stretch from ancient beliefs that the afterlife would be enjoyed among the stars. So some of the earliest versions of the Book of the Dead spells are seen in the burial chamber of a king by the name of King Unas. And this would have been in 2375 to his reign, 2375 to 2345 BC. And these were discovered at Saqqara, which is southwest of modern Cairo. Um, so originally, what's interesting to note is that the use of these pyramid texts was only intended for royalty and senior nobles, but that changed around 2100 BC, and many more spells, and not just in hieroglyphs, in hieratic. Hieratic would have been the more common text that the people would have written. Um, Hieroglyphs were what you found on temple walls and were very sacred. And almost, one of my Egyptian teachers said they're kind of like emojis in that looking at them, they can be interpreted in multiple different ways. So we have translations, but there still could be more behind what we're actually reading because we're reading what a scholar interpreted in, 1892 or whatever year I
Who's
said
not
earlier.
accounting for sarcasm.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So there is a lot of repeats because again, these papyri were found, and most people after these times, like when they started to be accessible to everyone that was buried, they were found with every single burial. So they were starting to see repeats of the same stories and the same spells and the same incantations. All but 75 of the 192 known spells of the Book of the Dead are thought to be derived from coffin texts, but the most of them are papyrus. So, and I think what's important to note too is the Book of the Dead is not they're not secret. Like the spells are, it's not like the Mummy where you have to find like the special key to open this Book of the Dead. They were common, they were found, and these spells and these incantations were known. So there's a little bit of Western fantasy around this that doesn't actually exist in the Egyptian pantheon. Um, and I should note that a lot of people will probably that study Egypt and that have looked at this, will be familiar with the description of the judgment scene, which I'm gonna go into a little bit in a little bit. But there's a very, very famous papyrus that actually, if you do end up making a reel, Mel, the one hanging behind me on my living room wall is the actual papyrus that I'm gonna be referring to, and it's called the Papyrus of Ani. So Ani was a scribe, in ancient Egypt, and of course, a person that was noble born. So we see these like duplications of these same spells, but what's interesting is the richer you were, the more money you had, the more artful and ornate the books would look that you were buried with. So his is extremely beautiful. The artwork is stunning. The one I have behind me is the judgment scene, which I will break down shortly. And unfortunately for the poorer folk, it was almost like a fill in the name under this line or over this line. So sometimes the name wouldn't even be placed in the spells. And it was just kind of like a McDonald's copy that, would have been reproduced, and because that's what you could afford. So that's just a little bit of the humanness at the time that I wanted to
Like
bring
when you,
forward.
buy those will packages at the registry and is
Exactly.
it like that?
And you just fill in the blank with your
Yeah,
name.
just fill in the
Yeah.
blank with your
Some of them, they
pen.
didn't even put in the name, so it was just like, "This guy, to whom it may concern." Poor guy entering the afterlife being like, "My name is Anu." Um, I'm just being silly. Okay, so there is evidence too, I should say, that the spells were to be read and rehearsed by the living reader, but in reality, the spells were intended to be spoken by the deceased. So these were meant for the afterlife. And as noted in the spells during the journey of Osiris, we'll say, the dead, so the deceased person, Ani, would also have been referred to as Osiris, which is interesting. So it's like you're personifying the journey that Osiris took.
Interesting.
So again, there's that idea of the union with the divine, that you are godlike, that you are that emanation of source. And it wasn't really separate like we see in the other pagan pantheons. So if we're looking at Osiris as a concept as well, rather than a personified god, as it is spoken in the Book of the Dead, we see the idea that a soul is working to transcend, and this was done during the afterlife. The themes of death and rebirth are pretty wild and common in the Egyptian pantheon. And I think the ultimate goal of Ani, or a deceased person, was an eternity spent in the field of reeds. So the field of reeds was like an idealized form of their mortal life on the banks of the Nile. So you'll hear that term come up. Um, but before I hop into the judgment scene and this story, I just want to share some information that I actually learned from a really beautiful Egyptian course that I took, that I think helps understand this journey that an Egyptian would have taken in their life and in the afterlife. So they had these kind of 9 stages or bodies that they would transcend through. The final one being the goal, or the final goal. So I'm going to go through those just so we kind of understand where a lot of this comes from. So there's number 1 is the Khat, or the Ka, which represents the physical body. So this is the thing that we can touch and see and is made of matter. Then number 2 is the Ka, spelled Ka, which is the vital life force, which is your magic. Then there was number 3, the Ba, which was your personality. Number 4 was called the Ak, or the Iku, and this was a combo of the 2 above, so the Ka and the Ba, and this is the representation of the immortal self. So you will hear the Ak referred to quite a bit in the Book of the Dead. Then there is number 5, Ren, which is your name, or the last time your name was spoken, and this is part of your life force. So the Egyptians really believed in the power of knowing a name, and we'll see this later when I talk a little bit about the pylons, they're called. So these would have been entities or kind of gates that you would have met in the afterlife and in the other world, and knowing the name of the entity that watched over that gate was very important for you to pass through, because it showed that you were living in Ma'at, which is like truth and justice and divine order. Then number 6 is the Shuyet, or the Sheut. And this was the shadow, or the teacher, and this was how you broke into freedom. So again, here we are referring to that the shadow self, right? Which we really do need to understand in understanding ourselves. Then there is the Jeb, or the Ib, which is the heart. And the ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was the seat of thought and emotion and morality and will. So this is heart coherence. They were describing heart coherence. And they believed that the heart was more important than the brain. And for those of us who exist kind of in this balanced spiritual way of being, we also understand that if we can make our
Mhm.
decisions from heart coherence, um, we are truly living ma'at. We're living that cosmic divine order. Then number 8 is sahu, which is the spiritual or glorified body. So this is a form of the kat that we mentioned as number 1, which is the physical body, and the ak, which is the combo of the ka and the ba. And this is basically what you inhabited in the afterlife, and it was bound by no laws. So I would almost say that this is like an etheric body that you would be
Yeah.
existing in
Or like the
and able
soul?
to yes, but like able to travel, right? So like it's very interesting how it's laid out. It's things are a little bit more looked at separately than just like the soul and the body. It's not just 3
Right.
things, there's 9.
Right.
So yeah, this is what you would be how you would be living in the afterlife. And again, bound by no laws, to me, that means you're not bound by a body. And then number 9 and the final stage is Sekhem, which means the power, energy, or life force. It was also a way of referring to the scepter that Osiris would have carried. But Sekhem is more about like the ultimate power and life force. I would almost honestly compare that to Reiki,
I
like
was just gonna
universal life
say,
force energy.
yeah, I'm, like, biting my tongue because there's a lot of overlap with
This is
this.
awesome.
Yeah, there's
This is
I'll bring it
awesome.
up after, but 9
Sure,
for sure.
sure. I'm gonna keep going here cut because um I'm gonna briefly talk about a couple hermetic belief things, but I know you have way more to elaborate on there. So just in these teachings, noting that Hermes, which is where the hermetic principles come from, Thoth, or as some people might refer to him as Yeshua, he was also referred to as the three. And
Mhm.
because he incarnated 3 times to bring this information forward. What is super important to understand and what the ancient Egyptians understood was that the human body is a microcosm of where we are. So as above, so below, the as above, so below principle, right? Um, they also understood that humans are inherently divine and not separate from God. What they understood also was that when we are separate, there is suffering.
Mm.
And I personally believe that Akhenaten, who I spoke about like years ago when we did our first episode together, before I was co-host, I believe Akhenaten understood this, and that's why he was putting the focus on one source or one energy source, one God, right, which he called Aten. And this is why he changed the entirety of the Egyptian pantheon when he became ruler. So I think there were Egyptians and especially pharaohs who were seen as like the embodiment or the spokesperson for the gods. That there were some that were really trying to implement this and really trying to help people understand what we had lost in Atlantean times. So if we look at humans, I'm going to get into the Book of the Dead very shortly, but if we look at humans and what we really are, so let's look at our biological outline. We are self-organizing and replicating. So, like, we're organic supercomputers. I think we need to realize we are soul-powered vessels and we interface with the living divine matrix. We are also, 2, bioelectrical conductors. So we can conduct electricity. And it was cool because in my course, I learned that at rest, we emit 400 watts. And when we are exercising or moving or using knowledge, we emit 600 to 1,000 watts.
Wow.
Um, yeah, we're kind of amazing. And again, the ancient Egyptians knew this. Number 3, we are electromagnetic field conductors. We are quantum. And the heart's toroidal field is a big part of that, which is why the emphasis on the heart. And if we look at like the ancient Egyptian burial rites, they would remove the heart, the brain, and specific organs from the body, and these would be placed in canopic jars. So specific jars that often had gods and goddesses' heads on them. And then the body was mummified. So the organs, the heart being one of the most important, was taken out of the body and preserved essentially separately because of its importance. Um, we are also frequency transmitters and receivers. So we channel sound, we receive and we send information, and we can transmit wirelessly over a distance, right? So think of distant healing, like what we do in Reiki. We are not bound by energy is not bound by time or space or material
Mhm.
things, and we are that too. We're also a battery, and we can see this depicted in a lot of the very famous reliefs in the temple walls, and this is shown actually specifically in the temple of Hathor at Dendera. There's actually a relief with a reptilian being, and he's holding this like battery, this light bulb, and snakes, which have multiple meanings in Egyptian teachings, but snakes are also a representation of energy, the movement of
Mhm.
energy. So every time you see a snake, it doesn't mean like a scary being. It's actually representative of how energy moves and like an energy current, which is kind of cool. And then finally, and we have talked about this before, Mel, that we are a library. So we are physically a microcosm of Earth. And we also talked about like the cloud, which is why past life regression and QHHT is so important, because as we live and as we are soul powered, we can access the cloud. We are the cloud, right? So we are made of the same fundamental minerals and water that comes in nature.
Well, and
So
water holds memory, and we're like
bingo.
75% water, then we're
Yes.
holding that much memory.
Exactly. And this is the amount of times that water is talked about in the Book of the Dead, and how it is like how the sacred waters were drunk. We have to remember as well, like with the Greek pantheon, that they would bathe and purify in water. Then the Pythia would drink the water from the Kasoti spring. Like this is all the parallels that we've been talking about. And here we are going even further back in time with ancient Egypt, and it's the same stuff.
Well, and even with, like, Christianity and, like, the Essenes and,
Mm.
the Gnostics, the baptism with water, the
Uh-huh.
purification that water symbolizes.
Absolutely.
So that's what
Yeah.
memory we're purified in the memory of the All.
Yes. And look how ancient Earth is. As long as Earth has existed, those things are stored in her, right? In the stones, in the rocks, in the trees. I already said rocks and stones, but you know what I mean. I like crystals, guys. Um, okay, so moving forward, let's look really briefly at the heart-sun connection. This is huge because the Egyptians worshiped the sun. They were solar connected, and there were solar priests, right? There was an understanding that the sun was life-giving. And if we look at the creation story, the sun shows up very early on. We call the sun Ra, or there's different names like Ra Aten, Ra Atum. And I will explain why that is. But you can actually enhance your electromagnetic field using the sun. Why do you think Bill Gates wants to block out the sun? Hello. Because it's a technology that we can utilize to become more quantum. So when you do, I think what I'm going to do for my next healing episode actually is I'm going to take the listeners through a process in using the sun to literally become more quantum.
Man, I
It's
love
very
that.
simple and anybody can do it. And the sun is literally a battery for us, it's a charger. So if we understand how we can use it, and the ancient Egyptians did, then we can become even more powerful than we already are, very simply. And another thing that it does, if I'm looking at the science behind it, is the sun supports telomere growth, and telomeres are part of your DNA.
Yeah.
So it actually can help to activate inactive DNA and to enhance the DNA that's already there. So you can grow more telomeres basically by meditating under the sun. kind of cool.
So cool.
Um, like, and it's so simple. That's what's amazing.
Hospitals used to have sun decks.
Bingo.
Yeah,
With linen sheets.
before the, Rockefellers took over.
Yep.
You
Bingo.
would be prescribed laying in the sun.
Yep. And thinking of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, who we talked about in the Federal Reserve episode, think about the name, right? Remember when we talked about how, like, the power in a name and how the Egyptians understood the power of a name?
Right.
Why do you think all of those people doing malevolent things change their names? Because if
Mm,
you know their name, they have less power over you.
that's right.
Just saying. Okay. So,
Connecting
so
dots.
connecting the dots. So if we look at like the sun god, right? So I mentioned Ra. There's different ways he's referred to. So there's Ra, Ra Atun, Ra Aten, and Ra Amun. So, or Amun on its own. What was actually taught to me, and this was by an Egyptian teacher. His name is Mohammed Ibrahim, and I highly recommend everyone check him out. He wrote a book that I'm forgetting the name of right now, but I'm going to list it in the show notes. But he speaks. He's an expert in hieroglyphs and the ancient Egyptian language. He's also a researcher and a scholar. And he speaks about these different names actually being the different stages of the sun or the day. So Ra would be connected to dawn. Atun is the morning. Aten is the afternoon, and Amun is the sunset. So again, like, kind of deciphering all of these, like, confusing things that we see, and we're like, "Well, I thought the sun god was called this. I thought he was called this." They had reason for everything. They were actually giving us, like, a map of the day and us understanding how that worked. And if we look as well at, sunrise and sunset, for instance, the ancient Egyptians believed that the sun was born and died every day. So every single day was a chance for life, death, and rebirth. So that's going to kind of play a key role when we look at the Book of the Dead and the information behind that. Um, and I also believe that the powers that should not be, because we are such powerful pieces of technology, I believe that the powers that should not be at that time also knew all of this. The priests specifically, because remember, there was a lot of power, money, and control when you were a priest. You were a noble born person, and they wanted to maintain their power and to keep the people from realizing their divinity. So, looking back again at that knowledge hoarding that we really messed up with at the end of Atlantean times, it's like they still. That's why Egypt didn't quite last in the way that we wanted it to, or rebuild in the way we wanted it to, because those same energies and those same beings came with those same plans, and they brought themselves to
Mm.
Egypt to continue, right? So that's why Akhenaten is so important, because I think he was there to kind of combat this. Um, and this is also why I think of, like, if we look at our modern day, just bringing that in now, look at all the blue light that surrounds us. We're
Oh,
constantly
yeah.
inundated with LED lights. Like, I've replaced all of the light bulbs in my home with the what are they called? The filament bulbs. So I only have
Incandescent.
that. Yes, the incand. Yeah, so I only have that red light in my home. I have one LED light bulb, and I rarely turn it on unless I need a lot of light at night to read something. But the powers that be know this, so they infiltrate us with this blue light to keep us awake, to mess our sleep cycles, to stop our telomere growth. Right. So
Right.
um, they're still trying to do it. So yeah, if you can get blue light blocker glasses, highly recommend. Change your light bulbs if you can, and get your butt under the sun.
I changed my light bulbs too to the incandescent, and boy, do they ever emit a lot of heat.
Yes, they do. They
Yeah.
do. And the LED doesn't at all.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and
What
if you
is
can.
natural is that light naturally emits heat.
Yes. Well, because think of firelight too. Like, we that was what we primarily used as our source of light before we had electricity. They did have electricity in Egypt, by the way, but it was
Mhm.
done using nature. It was like they figured out how to create a battery. They call it the Baghdad battery. You can look it up online if you'd like. Um,
Is that the
but
purse they're all carrying around?
I'm not sure. There's the way it's depicted in Egyptian stories is it actually looks like a light bulb. And what's interesting is inside of the
Oh,
light bulb is a snake
I've
because
seen that
that's the
one.
electricity, that's the energy,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, so now let's kind of move on into the Book of the Dead now that I've talked about a lot of other things. But I think these things are super important because they precede why the Egyptians wrote what they wrote. So let's look at Osiris first. So when the Egyptians talk about Zeptepi, which is the time before, and they talk about these beings, they state that these beings did walk the earth. So they were actual physical beings that were here, and the Egyptians knew they were galactics. So there were galactics actively walking the earth in Egypt as they did in Atlantean times. And I believe, and many people believe and know, that Osiris, was one of these first beings that was here to bring this information forward. And his representation in hieroglyphs is the Jed pillar. So it almost looks like a spine or it looks like a Tesla tower, like an energy tower. It's kind of
Mm,
cool, which was a symbol that represented resurrection. And it was said, according to the ancients, that he didn't just die or transcend, but he was actually the first to cross to another dimension. So if we're looking at things in terms of dimensions, what actually were they thinking was the afterlife or death? Like, were they talking about crossing into the fourth and fifth D from the third
right.
or higher, right? And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just share the story of Osiris and Isis and Set because this kind of sets everything up for the Book of the Dead. And it might get your brains or your telomeres. I'm just kidding. Might get your synapses firing here. No, that's DNA, not your brain, but you know what I mean. Just getting you fired up here to see if anything kind of resonates for you. So, um, I'm actually going to read a brief synopsis that chat gave to me because it's to the point and I like that. So,
Stuff.
Osiris was the wise and benevolent king of Egypt at the time. He brought civilization to humanity, teaching agriculture, justice, and the principles of harmony, living according to Ma'at, which is a concept as well as a goddess that means truth and cosmic order. His sister and wife Isis was a powerful goddess of magic, healing, wisdom, and motherhood. So we have the masculine and the feminine represented. Osiris' brother Set was the god of deserts, storms, violence, and chaos. Jealous of Osiris' popularity and kingship, Set devised a plan to seize the throne. Ah, warring brothers, again.
Mm.
According to the most famous version of the myth, Set crafted a magnificent chest made precisely to Osiris' measurements. And during a banquet, he promised to give the chest to whoever fit inside it perfectly. When Osiris lay down inside, Set and his accomplices slammed the lid shut, sealed it, and cast it into the Nile where it drifted away. Heartbroken but determined, Isis searched tirelessly for her husband's body. She eventually found the chest in the city of Byblos and returned Osiris to Egypt. However, Set discovered the body, cut it into pieces, traditionally 14 or 42. So I thought it was 7, but it's actually a lot more pieces, depending on the version of the story, and scattered them throughout Egypt to prevent Osiris from ever returning. Undeterred, Isis searched the land, gathering each piece of Osiris' body. And with the help of her sister Nephthys, with the help of Anubis and Thoth, and many versions of the story, she reassembled him. Through her magical abilities, she briefly restored Osiris to long enough to conceive their son Horus, who is the falcon-headed god. Because Osiris had passed through death, he did not return to rule the living world. Instead, he became the king and judge of the underworld, presiding over the souls of the deceased in the Hall of Judgment. Horus grew to adulthood and eventually challenged Set for the throne of Egypt. And after many battles and divine trials, Horus was declared the rightful ruler, restoring order after chaos. So in Egypt, I was taught that was the story. Sorry. I'm just too excited. I'm like rolling one thought into the other. In Egypt, they would ask you, "Are you a man of Horus or are you a man of Set?" So, however you answered would give a clear understanding of what you represented. So, like Horus, did you walk with justice, truth, and in cosmic order? Or, like Set, did you represent and live in chaos, violence, and storms? I can name
I mean,
people in my life that are
who
men
would
of
admit to
either.
that?
Yeah, right? Okay, so if we're looking at the deeper meaning of this story that I just read you, so Osiris represents life, renewal, rightful leadership, and the cycle of death and rebirth, and he represents the masculine energy. Whereas Isis embodies love, devotion, healing, divine wisdom, and the transformative power of magic. She represents the feminine energy. Set, as many Egyptians will say, is not simply evil. He represents chaos, disruption, deserts, storms, and the forces that challenge order. So, although he's the antagonist in this myth, and we all want to be like, he's the villain, Set also had an important place in Egyptian religion, and he was sometimes seen as a necessary force, right? The shadow. We have to
Yeah.
understand that the chaos is going to like be the catalyst to stir things up so that we understand what is truth, right? Um, and then finally, Horus symbolizes renewal, legitimate kingship, and the triumph of order over chaos. So in the Book of the Dead, we see many names or places that repeat all of those that I just mentioned. And what was really cool is I read that the place they would go was called Amenta,
Mm,
and not a mentee or a mente, like I know you're going to talk about, but which the ancient Egyptians referred to this specifically as the West, in the sense of where the sun sets or the land of the dead. So again, looking at the sun, it rises in the east and it sets in the west. It's born in the east and it dies in the west. So it's
right.
interesting that their underworld is in the west, or it was referred to sometimes as the West. The ancient Egyptians, as I mentioned, believed that the sun was life. So we could see this cycle consistently happening. Um, so if we think about it, this book is really talking about transformation because we would literally have transformation happen daily when we see the example of this in our actual lives and with how the sun moves. And it's a journey that we take, like we do this every day, right? So in in other words, that means we have a chance to be reborn every single day if we so choose.
Yeah.
Um, Another name mentioned, so I'm just going to kind of give a brief kind of glossary and just mention how they're spoken about in the book. So let's see here. So let's look at the term Arit, Arit, which was a gate in the other world. So this was one of 7 that the deceased must pass through, and there are actual physical depictions of, gates that are seen. There's one that I got to observe when I went to Karnak, and they look like they're gates layered within each other, so they're actually, like, carved into the rock. It's like small gate, almost like a babushka, like, you have, like, the little
Yeah.
dolls inside
Yeah.
one of the other. That's what how the gates are depicted. Um Ma'at, who is also known as the goddess personifying justice, truth, and cosmic order. And she's recognizable by the ostrich feather that she wears on her head. And it's this feather, so in the judgment scene, that the heart was weighed against during the last judgment. Ma'at is also a concept, not just a goddess, and what the ancient Egyptians were expected to abide by in life. Ra was the ancient sun god who created all living things. And his center of worship was actually at Heliopolis. And Heliopolis, I did write this in my notes. It's an ancient Egyptian city that is located in what is now northeastern Cairo, within the districts of it's Ain Shams and El Matareya. So this was a
And
very go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you, but Heliopolis is also, um the Greek pantheon, right? Like,
Yes,
that's
correct.
yeah, so this is where Hermes was because the
Okay.
yeah, because the Greeks call and, like, this is where you get, like, the Hellenistic, and this is where you
Mhm.
get this language from, is it's Greek.
That makes so much sense. And because too, like at the end of the Egyptian civilization, like we need to realize too that it was starting to be infiltrated. Like look at Cleopatra.
Yeah,
She was the final pharaoh and she was I don't want to Greek Macedonian and this was the Ptolemaic period. Her father is actually who built Dendera, the Temple of Hathor. So like there was overlap with these civilizations because they also had so many similarities, right?
right.
Um,
And, like, it's
that's really
my
cool. I
understanding,
didn't know
please
that.
correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Greeks came, like, and took over, right? And it was, like
In a way, like in a way, it was funny because Cleopatra, she was so respectful as a pharaoh in that she was one of the only foreign pharaohs that actually learned how to speak ancient Egyptian. She spoke 9 languages and she honored all of the Egyptian traditions. She didn't come in trying to make it Greek. That's what I find
mm,
super fascinating. Um, but and her consorts, like her being with Caesar and with Mark Antony, it was all for Egypt. It was all to
right.
preserve Egypt and keep it from Rome. She was doing her best, but unfortunately, that's a story for another day, and we know how that one
Yeah,
ended. But yeah, but that's really cool. I did not know that about the her that was
Heliopolis.
Hermes Center. I didn't realize that, which makes sense. Okay, so then looking at Hathor, so she was a very famous goddess of femininity who was also, they called her the mistress of the West. So back to references to the afterlife and welcomed the deceased into the afterlife. Um, Bringing in the idea of the understanding and connection to the stars, there was Sopdet, who was the female divine personification of the star Sirius. So we have to understand too that like these were Syrian beings. These were like Isis is an avian being. Um, Akhenaten is Syrian. Look at his face. Like you can see these pharaohs and these gods and goddesses were not human beings. Um, then there's reference to, let's see, the duat. So this is an important term. It means the other world. So this is where you're working to live when you are in the afterlife, or the realm of the dead, through which the sun god Ra travels each night, and where Osiris, Anubis, Thoth, and Hathor, and Horus, and Ma'at appear to the deceased. So all of these gods and goddesses were part of that judgment scene, and they're all depicted in this in the papyrus of Ani. You can see them all. And then that brings me to Thoth. He was represented as the ibis-headed god of writing and magic, who traveled with the sun god Ra, and he was the rearer of the judgment of the dead, and he recorded everything. So don't forget, he was a scribe.
Mhm.
Um, so I think what all of this comes to is the fact that the Egyptian pantheon was not just a collection of deities, it was part of an integrated worldview about how consciousness, morality, and the journey of the soul fit into the order of the cosmos. So I'm just going to read a brief quote here because it kind of mentions some of these things. And this is from the chapter of causing the soul to be united to its body in the underworld, and where I get an idea that maybe others have had, but just a thought. So the quote is, "Let not Osiris Ani, triumphant, triumphant, lie down in death in Anu." That's also another reference to the underworld. "The land wherein should are joined unto their bodies, even in thousands. My soul does bear away with it, my victorious spirit, who wheresoever it goes. If I would tarry, grant thou that my soul may look upon my body." So, my thought is this: what if the Book of the Dead is actually referring to how to live as an ancient
Mm,
Egyptian and how to resurrect oneself not in death, but in life? And we are being asked by this book and many of these spells to transcend from the matrix and the material body, because that quote talks a lot about being allowed to be separate from the body. So what if the journey in the other world is actually life on earth, and it is transcending this life that allows us to be who we truly are and to be truly divine? So if we look at, like, is it the Gnostic teachings where they believe earth is a prison, that we're
Yeah.
like we're here to learn in this prison? Like, what if the toils and tribulations of life are what they're speaking of here, and it's not the like, what if we're in the underworld right now?
Well, and that's, like,
Um,
how Set is described as chaos is like, it's necessary. Like, it's
exactly,
necessary that things get torn up and discombobulated so that they can go back in the right order.
exactly. So what I think and what this text shows me, and I've read the majority of it, it's not hard to read or to understand if you know what a lot of these terms are. Um, the ancient Egyptians understood that life without connection to the divine was suffering. That's very clear. And that this is all about staying connected to the divine and being literal gods on earth, or emanations of God on earth, as Osiris gives us an example, like Yeshua gives us an example, like Thoth gives us an example. So in reality, maintaining truth, justice, and cosmic balance was the responsibility of both the gods and humanity.
Hmm,
And I
beautiful.
think that's that. I could go on, but I won't. Let my girl Mel talk here.
I had a hard time keeping my mouth shut because there's a lot of parallels.
I can't wait.
Um, Now, okay, before I get into the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, and so everyone's listening, Steph calls him Thoth. How do you pronounce
I
it?
don't even know the pronunciation because I've heard so many different
How do you
pronunciations.
say it
I've heard
again?
So I say Toth, but some people,
Thoth.
the ancient Egyptians don't pronounce the TH. It's Tot, if I'm not wrong. But
Okay.
yeah, so
And
let
I've
me do some
always just said
research.
Thouth, and it's probably wrong, but as much as I try to change it, I've been calling him that for many
It's
years
all
now,
good.
and can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, maybe you can, but not this one. Okay, so before I get into this, I wanted to have some backstory on it because it is quite controversial. Um, Now, so it's written by Maurice Doreal, and that's his pen name. His real name, speaking of name changes, uh, his real name is Cloud Dodgen or Doggin, and he lived from 1902 to 1963. Now, he founded the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Now, the Brotherhood of the White Temple has come up before when we spoke
Mhm.
about Saint Germain and the violet flame of light in our I think we talked about him possibly in our Reiki episodes, and I think we talked about him again when we were talking about the what episode was that? The
We were talking about Madame
Romanian
Blavatsky and
underground,
yes.
Madame Lavowski. I think he came up again
Yep.
then. Anyway, so you'll have to go back and here we go, plugging ourselves. You guys, if you haven't been listening, this is like this you have to follow this podcast. It's not like a tune into one episode kind of
There's a
place.
through line.
Yeah, we're building upon what we're discovering. So go back, listen. Now, okay, so he founded the Brotherhood of the White Temple, which is interesting because I'm like,
Mm,
but Saint Germain was in the 1800s, so this doesn't quite make
mhm.
sense. But maybe I've need to do some more digging about who actually founded it. But he was heavily influential in the Brotherhood of the White Temple. Now, the Brotherhood of the White Temple is an esoteric organization that was originally based in Colorado that blended Christianity, theosophy, Hermeticism, Eastern mysticism, and occult teachings. Now, Maurice Doreal claims that in 1925, while he was visiting the Great Pyramid of Giza, he was led into a hidden chamber. And
Mm.
there he claimed to have discovered 13 emerald tablets written by Thoth, the Atlantean priest king.
Hmm.
So whoever was monitoring this operation, he was granted permission to translate them and then return them. So there are there is one image circulating the internet, that's alleged to be one of them, but it's never been verified as proof, and it's heavily debated whether or not Maury Storiel was out to lunch and making stuff up, or if what he gathered was in fact true. Um because there's no physical proof, but he
Mm.
claimed that these tablets they were green, hence the name emerald, um, and they were made of a material unknown to Earth, and
Mm.
that could never be destroyed. So so with that, it's like, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. It's like and like I've read this book countless times. I actually used to reference it in my, New Earth Reiki level 3, teaching we do 4 weeks, and we would go back and talk, and we would compare Thoth and this book specifically with the teachings of the Essenes and Hermeticism. And because there's a lot of parallels in what Steph already brought up, is that universal life force energy, the life force energies come up, and it talks about this a lot in this text.
Mm.
So, however, it's so interesting because the book starts with, like, you're meant to read this book 100 times over, because
Mm.
every single time, and it literally says this in its preface. And I cannot agree more with it, because every single time I have read it or reread it, it's like it's hitting me on a whole different angle. And so I have come at this on this go around with extreme skepticism. And I'm trying to figure out if this knowledge is, in fact, of the highest good, and it's supposed to be helpful for us as humanity to know ourselves and know God, and like really live this life with heart coherence. Or if it sprinkles in bits of truth and is actually trying to manipulate us. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm undecided, but I'm going to tell you all about it. Now, before I get into that, I also want to talk about how the Egyptians have recorded Thoth, who he was in, what would you call it? Like historical
Mhm.
evidence based, like this is what's agreed upon scholars.
Sure, sure.
That version of him. So he's one of the oldest and most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. His worship goes back to the early dynastic period around 3000 BCE, but also likely earlier. Um, they so Egyptians equated Ra to divine power, which is the sun god, and they equated Thoth to divine wisdom. So he was the record keeper of wisdom for Ra. So his roles were a divine scribe. He was often shown holding a reed pen, or writing palette, or papyrus scrolls. He's also depicted with an ibis head. So it's like they say that the beak is like to um show you that it looks like a pen. So he's the
Mm.
scribe, which is why he's also related to Hermes from the Greek pantheon, and later the Greeks.
Yep.
So later, the Greeks, they combined Hermes and Thoth, and they rebranded them as Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the third born, because he allegedly lived 3 lives. But what's interesting about that is I haven't figured out what the third life is, because it's Hermes, it's Thoth, and then who's the third? And some assume, including a former version of myself, that the third was Yeshua. Now, he said, in the Egyptian historical text, he said as the inventor of writing. So he invented hieroglyphs, language, mathematics, geometry, astronomy, calendars, record keeping. He's also the Lord of Wisdom. And so he would be the deity of priests, scholars, scribes, physicians, magicians, architects would all go to him to seek counsel. And then he was also the keeper of divine law. And so he represented Ma'at, which you've brought up, who was a goddess. She was a goddess, but she also was a representation of nature, which she represented truth, justice, balance, harmony, and cosmic order. So she was the one that you said was at what's it called? Sorry, the weighing
The
of
judgment.
the weighing of the hearts? Is that what the ceremony
Yes,
was called?
exactly. Yeah. It's her
Yeah.
scales that are and her feather that is being weighed against the heart.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, right, her feather, and then so, like, yeah, okay. So, he's also a judge of soul, so he would be present at the weighing of the heart ceremony, and, um, Thoth stood beside the scales. His job was not to judge, but his job was to record the outcome accurately. If the scales
Mm.
balanced, then Osiris admitted the soul into the blessed afterlife, and if not, the heart was consumed by the creature Amit. Did you talk about this?
So, it's interesting. I think I had that in my notes and I by accident skipped over it. So it's perfect that, that you're speaking of it. This is what's depicted in that papyrus, exactly what you're saying. I just sent you a picture of it actually, um,
Okay.
to look at later because
Yeah.
it's literally what you're talking about right now.
Okay, yeah, so I thought that was really weird. In that, like, okay, so here you go after you die, and you're judged by a goddess of truth, justice, and balance, and then if you pass the judgment, then you get to go to the blessed afterlife, and if you don't, then your heart is consumed
Mhm.
by a creature? That's
Yep,
pretty,
Amit,
like,
who is the
Amit.
crocodile-headed god.
Okay, and so, like, if you're is this, like does this mean, like, your soul no longer exists? Like,
That's a good question.
yeah, I thought that
I feel like there's almost like, I need to look it up, but I feel like there's almost like an in-between place where you'd be stuck. Like, you wouldn't get to transcend fully. You'd be which again, if we're looking at it in the sense of this is actually a book for how to live, that means
right,
you're just stuck back on Earth reincarnating again and having to learn your lessons over again
without a heart.
without a heart.
So then Thoth was also the master of magic. Egyptians didn't separate magic, science, medicine, and religion. They were all forms of sacred knowledge.
Yep.
Um, so Oh, Heka was the Egyptian word meaning divine force or power,
Mhm.
and it was used by both gods and humans. So
Mhm.
Thoth was considered the greatest master of this sacred knowledge. And so they say his wife was Ma'at, which is interesting.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, anyway. So this is how he was viewed in recorded Egyptian literature. Now, in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean. It's so cool, you guys. Like this, like you have to just read this for your own. Like, it's like a manual of the fuckery that's going on the earth right now. And like
Mm.
it talks about the reptilians, they call it like serpent-headed beings. But there's how many tablets are there? I think there's 13 tablets, and then they say that there's, 2 more that they were not allowed to record because it
Mm.
was beyond the knowledge permitted. Now, Thoth describes the time of Atlantis and how it was like, it's all written by Thoth. So he describes what Atlantis was like and that it was wonderful and like it was great. It was fantastic. Everyone was living life and in the light. And then he kind of talks about um the children of light and then the dweller. So you have and he describes Atlantis that was the time before the little people, meaning that we now are little, and
Mhm.
when Atlantis existed, humans were larger, physically bigger, giants, right?
Yep, totally.
So yeah, so it's interesting that this is brought up. This giant thing has been brought up in many different cultures. So
And if you
during
look
Atlant
at the
Go ahead.
Sorry, just to add to your point, if you look at the depiction of a lot of the gods and goddesses and pharaohs and things like that, they're often enormous giant statues with these little bitty beings standing beside them. So there's even talk that like it showed that your height also kind of equated to the dimension that you were connected to. So higher the dimension, the higher the height in a
Yeah,
physical manifestation. So absolute girl. It's in Egypt, you
totally.
can see it.
Yeah. And so, it also talks about, he talks about how he had a childhood there. So he was born in Atlantis, and he had a father. Who was his father's name?
Wow.
Let me go. His father's name was oh my gosh, I don't know how to find it. It was, like, Thought May, that's what it was, Thought May.
Oh.
Um, and so that he grew up and then he oh my it's like I could spend like 2 hours talking about this because of all of my notes here. Uh, so he basically had a thirst for wisdom, a thirst for knowledge, and so he committed himself to learning more and more and more and more. And he, because of that, was then sought out, and it sounds like he went from human form to God form, much like the episode we talked about Enoch
Mm,
moving being sought out by God and moving from human form as Enoch into God form into Metatron. So this
mm.
is where I'm like, this is very interesting parallels, and this is why I'm very undecided about whether this book also talks about the flower of life.
Yep,
Um,
yep.
yeah. And so, okay. So so the first tablet is like the first tablet is the history of him in Atlantis. And so it talks about how they literally took a spaceship from the fall, and then he took a spaceship with his followers to the land of Khem, and
Mhm.
then they conquered the people. My goodness. So, where is this? I really should have organized this better. I'm
Thank you
like,
for bringing in the name too, because that is what Egypt was referred to in ancient times. It was Khem,
Chem.
Khem. It's not called
Yes.
Egypt. That comes from a Greek word.
Yes. So, sorry, I'm looking for where the thing that's kind of confusing is it kind of jumps around.
Mm,
It doesn't really tell you the story chronologically. Yeah, so, like, here in tablet 4, he says, um I, in my childhood, lay 'neath the stars on long buried Atlantis, dreaming of mysteries far above men. Then in my heart grew there a great longing to conquer the pathway that led to the stars. Year after year, I sought after wisdom, seeking new knowledge, following the way, until at last my soul, in great travail, broke from its bondage and bounded away. Free was I from the bondage of earthmen, free from the body, I flashed through the night. Unlocked at last for me was the star space. Free was I from the bondage of night. Now to the end of space sought I wisdom, far beyond knowledge of finite men. Far into space my soul traveled freely into infinity's circle of light. Like, it's like he left
Mm.
his body and then is traveling through space, and it sounds a lot like the story of Enoch in the Watchers, moving, um, outside of his body and into the light. And there, like, he goes and he finds, like, this force of all things. They talk about the ether, the ether being the force, and how, um, the dweller can take the ether and turn it into matter. And so he can, like, make whatever he wants out of it.
Mm.
So, yeah, so he spends his whole life seeking wisdom, and learning and learning and learning, and he's just there's, like, this really cool quote in here about that I was like, I really loved that because it's like, it's us. It's everyone that's listening, it's you and me. It's like it's all about how, wisdom and knowledge are the way to eternal peace. Essentially, it's like
Yes.
you have to know more and more and more, you have to have this desire to know more, um, in order to totally come into the acceptance
Mm.
of God's love. So, I thought that was really cool, and it talks a
That's
lot
like
about, um okay, let me just, gather my thoughts here. There's, like, so many places I wanna go at once.
as
Thought
you were saying that too, that makes me think as well of that priestess that, in the Greek pantheon that was regressed that said, you know, "What are you learning at the temple?" And she said, "Everything," because that's
Yes!
how you become closer to God.
Everything.
Mhm. Yeah.
Totally.
Yep.
Um, and so because he learned so much, he was called in to the halls of Amenti, where the dweller
Mm.
lives. So the dweller, calls him in, so he seeks for him, and he says, so there's the dweller, and then there's the children of light, and then there's humans. Which so they're like we very
'Kay.
specific, like, there's a hierarchy of beings.
Mhm.
So the dweller of the temple asked that I be brought before him. Few there were among the children of men who had looked upon that mighty face and lived. For not as the sons of men are the children of light when they are not incarnate in a physical body. So you can't look at his face without dying. Now, in the
Mm.
Bible, in Exodus, in chapter 33 of Exodus, verse 20, it says, "You cannot see my this is God talking to Moses, says, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live."
Hmm.
And so the dweller says the same thing. Like, the dweller is like, you can't look at him without dying unless you're highly advanced.
Ah.
Um, yes. And so I'm just like, okay, so is the dweller Yahweh, right? Because Yahweh was the one
Mm.
speaking to Moses.
Mhm.
Yahweh is also known as the demiurge or Yaldabaoth, which I talked about in the Gnostic creation story.
Hmm.
So this is where I'm like, okay, this is interesting because Thoth then, like, goes into the dweller's space, which is essentially a tunnel underground, and commits to serving the dweller. And whatever the dweller wants, Thoth will relay. Like, he is his, which is a
Hmm.
lot like Metatron. Sounds a lot like the same thing. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and so there's a lot of talk about reincarnation too, and how the fall of Atlantis, basically, the dweller commanded the flood because the people had become unbalanced. And so it talks about how, like, you need to be balanced in your heart and in love in order to gain more knowledge. And if you aren't balanced in love in the way that you're using your knowledge, and if you become greedy in knowledge, and if you become, um Yeah, greedy in knowledge in the sense that you're using it as service to self and not service to all,
Mm.
then things can take a dramatic turn, and that's what happened in Atlantis. And so the dweller then commanded the flood, and so also brings up the word, logos, which logos is the word. So, in like original biblical text, the logos means the word, which is what everything was created from. So it was
Huh.
from vocally speaking, vibration, that from the ether you created physical form. So the dweller then commands the flood, and like the place in which he's dwelling is called Undal. I don't know
Mm.
if you've heard that one before or not.
I have,
Um,
but I don't know where.
yeah, and so I'm, like, trying to figure out where Undal is, and from my previous research, my hypothesis is that Undal is, Mount Shasta.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so this is where, the dweller lives, and this is the entrance to the halls of Amenti. And, like, the halls of Amenti, getting there, guess how many doors there are?
7.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah. 7. And, like, there's also, like, 7 main chakras. So, like, this could also
Mhm.
all be allegory. Like, this could all be,
Sure.
like, the within, the temple within, right? Um,
Mhm.
it could be physical, but anyway, it talks about how, like, no one goes through the halls of Amenti through these passages because they're heavily guarded, by really scary, like, the way they're described is, like, it's just scary, um, and, like, you can't look at them without dying. Like, what are these things down there
Mm.
that are guarding these gates?
So this makes me think of I actually forgot to go into this, but the pylons. Remember in the Book of the Dead I mentioned
You
there were
did.
like 12 or 14 pylons. So they say, do you mind if I just add
Go
this to
for
what
it,
you're
yeah.
speaking about? So they were guarded by powerful deities. This is what I found in my research, or supernatural beings, these pylons. Each had its own name, and the deceased was required to know the names of the gate, its guardians, and often a specific password or spell before passage was granted. So it's
Yeah.
almost like the Book of the Dead was giving you the names to traverse, like, what's underneath the ground in the halls of Amenti and or Amenti or Amenta, as they say in this. And it wasn't so much seen as like a trick or a puzzle, but knowing the true names demonstrated that the deceased possessed Ma'at, that they had the right knowledge, they had divine order and spiritual preparedness.
It
So
sounds
like
very similar.
yeah, and then thinking, like, when I mentioned the bloodlines that we had talked about in other, episodes where it's like, why did they change their names? You know, like, because it gives you power over them if we know the name,
Well,
right?
and the names
So
aren't mentioned in here. They're
interesting
called
and
they're called not 1, not 2, but they're called 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, but they
interesting.
skip 1 and 2,
Huh.
and I'm
Y
like, "What is
yeah.
that about?"
Yeah, because even, like, in looking at it symbolically, there's the idea that the pylons or these gates with these beings represented stages of spiritual transformation, right? So it's like each gateway was another step away from, like, earthly existence and closer to becoming an Ak, which is that word that I mentioned. And
Interesting.
yeah, so it's like and
So
it even, like, mirrors, like, how you enter a temple. Like, you cross a threshold or the pylon, which was always had red granite over it, and then you would enter through the chambers, and then you would make your way to the Holy of Holies, which is where the god or goddess would have sat. So
interesting.
interesting.
So
But, like,
so
yours sounds spookier.
very similar because so they go through and they at each gate, he has to, like, do something to get through the gate, and it's like so the dweller calls him because he's already knowledgeable, then he moves through the halls of Amenti, makes it all the way to where the dweller lives, and
Mhm.
so he then talks about how in this space that the dweller lives, the children of light also live, and he talks about how, the dweller and the children of light, which he then assumes he becomes one of the children of light, um, they are formless, but they
Hmm.
can take form. They can take human form
Mhm.
when they want to. It kind of makes me think of, like, in The Matrix, the agents, where the
Yeah.
agent yeah, where
Yeah.
they're formless, but then they can move in and become with form
Yeah.
at will when they want to. So,
And
they walk
remember the
amongst
Ankh.
us, but they are not us.
Yes, yes, and the Ankh, like, if we look at the definition of what the Egyptians say that is, it's the combo of the Ka and the Ba, which is the vital life force and the personality. So, again,
Right.
it's like this, like yeah, exactly
You
what you
don't
just said.
Yeah, so it's the personality and the life force, but without the body.
Yes,
And so the dweller and very specifically 32 children of light, there's 32
interesting.
of them,
Hmm.
plus the dweller would make 33, which could get
Oh,
us into a Freemason rabbit hole.
yep.
Um,
But also
um,
33 is the number of self-mastery. That's like
yes.
the right?
So they can move in and out, and then so Thoth, is then given the task to so this is like so he goes in, this is before the flood, so the dweller calls him in, he passes the test, makes it through the halls of Amente, becomes one with the children of light, and then commits his life to doing as the dweller wants him to do. And then the dweller then brings the flood, um and Thoth boards, literally calls it a spacecraft,
Yep.
um and with his followers, I don't know who these people are that come with him, but then they land in Khem, and then so this is where I'm like, I don't know, like, this all his teachings are beautiful, but, like, the way in which he goes about it seems pretty sus. So they
Hmm.
land in Khem, and then this okay, I'm gonna read this. So they land in Khem, and he says, "Then raised I my staff and directed." Oh, wait, no, I gotta start back here. Okay, so fast we fled towards the sun of the morning until beneath us lay the land of the children of Khem. Raging, they came with cudgels and spears, lifted in anger, seeking to slay and utterly destroy the sons of Atlantis. Then I raised my staff and directed a ray of vibration, striking them still in their tracks as fragments of stone of the mountain. Then spoke I to them in words calm and peaceful, telling them the might of Atlantis, saying we were children of the sun and its messengers. Cooed I them by my display of magic science until at my feet they groveled when I released them. And then long dwelt we in the land of Khem, long and yet long again, until obeying the commands of the Master, who while sleeping yet lives eternally. And then he sent out his sons of Atlantis and sent them in many directions. From the womb of time, wisdom might rise again, her children. So interesting. They show up and then they overpower the native people and
Hmm.
take over leadership.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, well, this sounds pretty
Doesn't sound like it's of the light.
right. Like, pardon
Hmm.
me. But then refers to bringing people back to the time of wisdom, that might rise from her womb within her children. And then I think of the Gnostic text and Sophia and wisdom and her being a good guy. So I'm like all over the place with this. I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, because then the messages of Thoth are so incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, so let me bring up some of those so that we can really get so they take over and then they rebuild. So then he claims he builds the pyramid, and he claims that he hides his spaceship under the Sphinx. He doesn't call it, he calls it a lion-headed
Mhm.
statue. And so he buries the spaceship, waiting for his return. And then he goes back to the halls of Amente, to sleep until he's called back, but that
Mm.
he's still able, without form, he's still able to move amongst the children of men. Now,
Mhm.
like, the way the halls of Amente are described is it like, honestly sounds like a cryovac chamber, like, where these souls are being stored and then can be uploaded into different bodies, into, like, different and, like, their consciousness is stored, and then they can be uploaded into different bodies, but the body has to be the right body for it to hold this level of consciousness at the same time.
Is that not almost like a physical way of describing reincarnation, though, right?
Literally.
Because if we look at, like, and this concept came to me more recently, like, I thought reincarnation was the only way. It's like, yeah, you're gonna come back. You're either gonna come back or not because you've learned your lessons or not, but the reality is that is part of the prison, is constantly coming back and constantly coming back. The goal is that we're not going to go to the tunnel with the light at the end. We wanna go up, man. Like, and you have a choice. That's the thing. And this is something that was a dear friend kind of was teaching me. And this is ancient shamanic teachings that we've been told to follow the light at the end of the tunnel, which, sounds like it's being described as a menta or a menti.
Mhm.
And in reality, I wanna go up, man. I don't wanna come back here and do this all over again. You
Well,
know?
and I've heard
And
of people saying to not go into the tunnel of white light when you die.
exactly, that's what I'm saying. I don't wanna go
Yeah.
into the tunnel and keep doing this cycle that I don't have to be in when I thought that that cycle was normal and correct. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I know, and, like, and it talks about the flower of life, like, within that, like, there's, like, so he makes it to the halls, and there's a light in the center, and he has to put a crystal in there, Steph, just for you. That he has to put this crystal in, and then this, like, flower of life, and like, all I could, like, envision when I'm reading this is, like, the Metatronic code that's, like, this imprisonment
Mhm.
that's, like, keeping us captive. But then he,
Yeah.
like, says things like, "Know ye not, O man, of your heritage? Know ye not are truly the light, son of the great sun, when ye gain wisdom, truly aware of your kinship with light? Now to ye I give knowledge, freedom to walk in the path I have trode, showing you truly how my striving I trode the path that leads to the stars." And it says, like, to get out of hark ye, O man, and know of thy bondage, know how to free thyself from thy toils. Out of the darkness shall ye rise upward, one with the light and one with the stars. Follow ye ever the path of wisdom, only by this can ye rise from below. Every man's destiny leads him onward into the curves of infinite's all. Like, it's like a poem, like,
Mm,
it's beautiful, and he's, like, reminding you that you are the ether. And so, like, throughout this,
mhm,
he talks about how you, while are in physical incarnation as a man, you are not earthborn, you are
mm,
starborn, and, like, in order to transcend the bondage of the earthborn, you need to seek the wisdom, and then he, like, gives you, like, explicit instructions on exactly how to get out of the bondage of the earthborn. And so
mhm.
it starts with, you have to fast, and so we've seen this
Yep.
many times, is you have to
Mhm,
fast the body. So you nothing heavy in the body, like, totally empty. Then you have
mhm.
to meditate, and then you have to visualize, and then you have to visualize. What does it say you have to visualize? Um so lie down in the darkness after you meditate, or after you fast, then lie ye down in the darkness, close ye eyes from the rays of the light, center thy soul force in the place of thy consciousness, shaking it free from the bonds of the night. Place in the mind the image thou desire, picture the place thou desire to see, vibrate back and forth with thy power, loosen the soul out of its night. Fiercely must thou shake with all of thy power until at last my soul shall be free. So he's explaining, and then he, like, goes on that you have to then sing. So you fast, you meditate, You visualize where you want to be in this like garden of light, and then you sing. So then you need to vocalize it. Um, and then uh, and then you move into this, then you ignite this flame. Okay, so you ignite the flame of light from this like pattern, or sorry, thing that you have to do, and then you move up into the spirit of light. So then you become one with God, and this is how you transcend and avoid the bondage
Hmm.
of the earth that
So,
was just crazy. And then the dweller, I'm like, okay, well, what's with the dweller? Who's this dweller, right? Like,
mm,
who is he? And it says he's living in bodies among men, so he can move among men as a man, but he's not. He can lie dormant in Unal, in the tunnels of Unal, um, but he can also take form as man while still being there, so he can be in multiple places at once. He's not earthborn. He's from beyond us. He's the son of a cycle advanced beyond men. Um, and then he was never one with the children of men. Da-da-da. So then he came to Earth, so he conquered it, he must have, divided the kingdoms. There was 10 ruled by the children of men. Then he built a temple. I don't know. It says like I don't know where this is in modern times. Like I know that people have hypothesis it's Mount Shasta. Um, but I don't know if that's for sure because it doesn't actually say that in here, obviously. So then he created this temple out of the word. He spoke it into existence. And then he became formless within the temple. He chose then from among the people 3 who became his gateway. Um, duh-duh-duh, which it's 3. Oh, and so 3 is the being that is at one of the gates of the halls of the dead, or the
mm,
halls of Amente.
hmm.
So it's interesting. Um, da, da, da.
Can I can I share what
Yes,
kind of comes to mind as you're reading
please
this?
do.
So, you said a word that made me really kind of perk up. You said the word avoid, right? Where like a lot of what he says is very beautiful, but a lot of this stops you from being in your human body. And is that not what we're here to do? Like we want to be
Interesting.
accessing the divine and we want to be connecting to the divine, but it's
Yeah,
not through being a star being on a spaceship and flying away and avoiding being a human being. And to me, a lot of this is very beautiful, but it sounds a lot like controlled opposition where it's like there's pieces of truth in what's being shared in this book, but then again with the flower of life, like the flower of life in the form that we know it is depicted on a temple wall at Abydos in Egypt. Like you can see it there.
yeah,
But was this a time when the corruption had already started to come in? And was this a time where, like, the Book of the Dead is really connecting you to your, yes, to the divine, but also to your humanity and to being a good
yeah.
human on earth? Whereas this is wanting to kind of disconnect you from earth and ask you to access the stars, which we can do, but you can only do that if you are in a body. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's interesting because it is
No, you're
so
totally right.
beautiful, and there's so many things that I'm like, "Wow, that's gorgeous," but I'm like, "What is the purpose for being here? We're here to be in this body." And, I'm not saying any of it's wrong, but it's like maybe this was after, like, maybe it's maybe like, think of it this way too, teachers, like I had a teacher that said to me, you know, "I want you to be better than me because that means I've done my job." So maybe
Yeah,
we're being shown that we need to be better than this teaching because a lot of that keeps us entrapped and in avoidance from our purpose here, right? And it's like none of it, I'm not saying it's wrong because a lot of it parallels to what's written in the Book of the Dead, but I don't think it's very, like, celebratory of living. I don't think it supports living.
it's very
Um
much, yeah, it's very much about, yeah, getting out of the body. You're right. It is
Mhm.
super. It's But it also talks about that it's from within that you do it. Like,
Sure.
you go
Yes.
in and I'm
Yes.
trying to find this spot, like, I didn't
Yeah.
mark these pages properly.
Because like, when you talk about the Dweller, I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds like a malevolent alien being that
For sure, like,
came
it
from
sounds
an
like
advanced
I'm like, they get
civilization."
there and they take over, they use
Yeah.
the staff that makes everybody immobile, which modern technology exists to do that,
Yeah. And
literally, that
legit. And what about
yeah.
those 2 tablets? Are we for sure that there's like, when they say there's information we can't handle, what if it's key information that we need to understand the other, what, 13, 12 tablets, or what we have, right? So it's like, what if we see the end of the story, and the end of the story is Toth being like, "I got hijacked." Like, you know what
Well,
I
and
mean?
that's just it, like, when
I
he,
don't
like,
know.
goes and, like, this dweller, like, he just, like, gives his life to this dweller,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
right? And then, but then, like, it goes on and it talks about how these that the dweller is protecting us and that
Uh,
South is protecting us from these
mm,
serpent-headed beings that also can disguise themselves as men, and they
mhm.
appear as men, and that they've infiltrated, and that's what happened in the time of Atlantis, is that they
Sure.
infiltrated the leadership pretending to
Mhm.
be men, but that there's a certain word that you can say that makes their mask come down, and you see them as serpent
Mm,
headeds, and that they're at it again, and that it's, like, about trying to it's this war between them and these serpent-headed beings, which
yeah.
sounds
Yeah,
like reptilians, right? Which
for
is,
sure.
like,
Yep.
a common conspiracy theory is that,
Mhm.
which I've gone down that rabbit hole many, many a times, and so it's
Oh,
like, I
yes.
can see why people would find this to be incredibly helpful on their
Sure.
awakening. I'm not even gonna say spiritual, I'm gonna say awakening journey,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of things in here that's like, "Oh, yeah, like, I've seen that, like, this is true," and, like,
Yeah.
there are these serpent-headed beings that are masquerading around as humans, and,
Mhm.
I do think that there's this, like, immortality to these gods that move from body to body, and they
Mhm.
they know more than us because they remember everything and we don't,
Sure.
and so, there is this, like, and I've heard it so many times that there's this cycle of entrapment, and that, when we die, it's like, and so I think that some of this could be about, just like the Book of the Dead, is
Yeah.
that it could be about, after you die, how to avoid the loop of reincarnation, and because
Yeah,
it talks
sure.
about, like, the afterlife being totally peaceful, and that when you're
Yeah.
without body, it's like it's this beautiful, peaceful, um, like, real life, and that the life
Yeah.
that we have in the bodies of men is not life at all. Um,
Yeah, and even the
but then
the
you're
the
right, like, that could just be a hijack of the
Mhm.
information and, like, twisting it so that we don't wanna be alive anymore.
'Cause, like, even look at the concept of the field of reeds that they talk about as their afterlife. That's a very physical, human personified concept, right? That you're gonna
Mhm.
spend your entire life in something that looks like the Nile. Isn't that where you're already living? So that to me is like that you're trapped in this reincarnation cycle, right? You're just coming
Totally.
back to Earth over and over again, when it's like we're here to retrieve our soul. So also talking about Osiris, where Osiris was split into these pieces, perhaps they were soul pieces that were
Right.
fragmented that he needed to combine. Because, like, that's also what we're here to do, is we're here to retrieve all the parts of our soul so that we can become whole, so that we can go up and, like, not have to keep doing this,
Yeah.
like, it's Earth is an intense school, man. And yeah, to make people stuck, you can trap them here, right? It's also fucking beautiful. Like, Earth is
It
one of the most
is.
beautiful planets in the solar system. Like, and the heart of our solar system is the sun, which gives us life. Like, we have so much beauty here, and that's again this juxtaposition of, like, good and evil being simultaneous, as above, so below. You can't have one without the other. So we're given the
Totally.
gift of being here and living on planet Earth, which is beautiful. And like, I've never seen more beautiful flowers and trees and sunsets. But in turn, it's also a very challenging place to live, you know? So
Totally.
like, yeah, so I really feel like we've hit on something interesting here, and I don't think we have a
Yeah.
final hypothesis or decision, but I kinda like that because it opens up the exploration for further knowledge in comparison to this, where we're seeing all this pattern recognition, within all of these pantheons that we are delving into. So, yeah, I don't know,
Yeah,
I'm
and
kind
I
of
think that's really what, like, I am wanting to commit to is that I wanna just be on the fence with, like, most of this
yeah.
research that we're doing because it's like, we never know, and if you come to a and even if you don't wanna sit on the fence, even if you wanna decide, even if,
Mhm,
like, you feel uncomfortable and offended by us saying that South might, not be of the light and you've been worshiping him in some form or of another, like, you're allowed to change your mind, and, like,
mhm,
Steph and I have talked about this so many times, like, we are always allowed to change our mind when we're presented with new information, and our value as human beings is not a reflection of our beliefs. Like
yeah,
you have inherent value, and it doesn't matter what you think to be true or not. Like, you are worthy of being here. You are worthy of taking up space. You are worthy of asking questions,
mhm.
exploring new ideas, especially ones that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And so, like, just remember that, like, I used to teach that Thoth was a good guy, and because there's a lot of, like, parallels with, like, him using light and life force to create things, and I'm like, "This sounds like Reiki," right? Like,
yeah,
this
yeah,
sounds very similar, and, like, literally talking about the life force energy and the ether and pulling it out through intention, through thought, and directing it at different places. And so I'm like, this sounds a lot like Reiki, and that's where I like based that in. But now when I look and find the pattern recognition that, like, oh, like this guy went and showed up and conquered other beings, like, ew,
yeah,
I don't like
yeah.
that.
I feel like someone that is, like, working in places of the light is not they don't even need to do that, you know? So, it'll be
No,
because again, maybe Toth changed his mind. Like,
maybe.
we don't know, like, if this man was ancient or this being was ancient and has existed for thousands of years, like, how can we imagine that he also is immune to becoming corrupt or having his mind changed? We don't know, right? So, again,
Yeah.
I think the theme that this all brings us back to is coming back to the self and the intuition and developing the discernment to understand what feels right for you. And it may not
Mhm.
be what Mel or I think is right. And that's okay too, you know? Like, don't go murder people and think that you're doing it in the name of Thoth the Atlantean and it's your turn to conquer. That's not what we're saying. That's not cool at all. Don't do that shit. But it's bringing you back to that sense of self and that those answers are gonna come through your connection to God, and that it can be peaceful, and it doesn't have to always be a struggle, and it doesn't have to involve conquering,
And
for you to
chaos
get
can
there.
exist at the same time.
Exactly.
And, like,
Exactly.
I look at the world how it is right now in the summer of 2026, and, like, the sky right now where I'm living is full of smoke because of forest fires in neighboring
Mhm.
provinces. Like, there's mass genocide and wars going on throughout the world. Like, there's people
Yep.
constantly screaming and fighting with each other online about this, that, and whatever other data center. We're running out
Yep.
of water. There's just, like, there's so much fear porn. There's just everything out there that can, like, totally, like, make you discombobulated. Can't even say
Yep.
the word, which is
Wow.
ironic. But, like, there's so much bad, but then I go out and I'm like, I look at my life and, like, it's so incredibly beautiful. Like,
Yes.
I have a loving, and wonderful marriage. Like, my marriage is so, so wonderful. I have 2 beautiful children to love. Like, we get to drive an hour and, like, be in the mountains with our best friends and swim in pure, like, crystal blue water. Like, it's just like, we were blessed enough to renovate our house, like, we really, really I've spent the whole summer, like, at home with my kids, outside playing with our friends, at lakes, at beaches, like, it's so beautiful. My life is so beautiful, and while, yes, the world could also be viewed as chaos and utter destruction happening all around us, it's like, you get to choose which path you wanna be on. And
Mm.
so, like, if you wanna live out of fear that the reptilian overlords are gonna come and take you out, go for it. But if you wanna live in, like, "Whatever, man, I'm here while I'm here, and I'm gonna really, really enjoy it while I'm here," like, do that too, and, like, both things can happen, and anyway,
Yes.
we've
Yes.
gone way over time, but
Yeah, but I had a feeling this one would be that way.
me too.
There was so much knowledge to share, but also just a lot of really talking some things out and hypothesizing about things that I think are super important to speak about. So, with that, just a reminder that we have, I just released our subscriber only healing episode from this week. So I'm taking everyone on a journey to Delphi, actually, where you get to connect with the oracle, who is essentially you, because it is a meditation. So if you're interested in checking that out, that is up. You can sign up through the actual link on Spotify. It is available only on Spotify. And this episode has definitely inspired me personally to bring in some of these cool ancient Egyptian teachings to our next healing episode. So stay tuned for that. And may I mention our series that's coming up in the fall?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm really excited, and Mel and I have been getting really excited about this. We are going to be doing a healing series. Specifically, we are going to be bringing on practitioners of many different healing modalities that have changed my life and Mel's life, that are not the modern Western medical system. So, some really different perspectives on healing. We're going to bring forward some friends, some new friends. And we're going to have a bunch of different guests that you're going to get to meet and get to know. So we can just bring some awareness to these incredible modalities that we have on this planet, that might not be in the mainstream or you might not be aware of. So that's going to start in the fall. We have our first guest booked. So I'm really, really excited about that. And we can't wait to share that with you. It's going to be awesome, I think.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We're gonna go into a positive timeline, so I can't wait.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be great. So friends,
All right.
thanks for journeying with us to the halls of Amenti and deciphering this beautiful pantheon and these gorgeous teachings from ancient Khem. And we hope you will listen to our next episode. And with that, may peace be with you.
May peace be with you.